The dust of the trail still clung to Lucas Granger's coat as he rode into Silverwater Creek, Montana territory, in the summer of 1878. His parched throat burned with each breath of the arid mountain air, and his stomach growled in protest of the jerky and hardtack that had sustained him for the past 3 days. What he wouldn't give for something fresh, something that didn't taste of leather and salt. The thought of real food quickened his pace as he guided his dapple-gray stallion, Thunder, down the town's main street. The settlement had sprung up from nothing in the 5 years since he'd last passed through. What had once been little more than a trading post and saloon now boasted proper wooden sidewalks and nearly 24 businesses. A newspaper office, a blacksmith, a general store, even a small hotel with glass windows that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Lucas dismounted in front of the livery stable, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. His long frame unfolded to its full 6 feet 2 inches as he stretched, working out the kinks that had settled into his back and shoulders during the long ride. At 32, he was still in his prime, though the life of a cattle driver had left its mark in the weathered lines around his eyes and the occasional ache in his joints after a hard day's work. "Haven't seen you before, mister," the stable boy said, eyeing the Winchester rifle in Lucas's saddle scabbard. "Been through once or twice," Lucas replied, reaching into his pocket for a coin. "Take good care of my horse. He's carried me far." "Yes, sir, water, feed, and a good rub-down." Lucas nodded his thanks and turned toward the main street, intent on finding the nearest establishment that might serve food. The smell reached him before he saw the place, the unmistakable, heavenly aroma of fresh baked bread. His mouth watered instantly, and he followed his nose to a small shop with a hand-painted sign that read Creek Bakery. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and for a moment he stood transfixed. The shop was warm and inviting, with shelves of golden brown loaves and a glass case displaying pastries. But it wasn't the sight of food that stopped him in his tracks, it was the woman behind the counter. She was wiping flour from her hands onto a well-worn apron, her chestnut hair pulled back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. A few wayward strands had escaped and framed a face that Lucas could only describe as striking. Not the fragile beauty of the saloon girls or the pampered looks of city women, but something altogether more real and vital. "Can I help you?" she asked, and her voice matched her appearance, clear and direct, with a musical quality that seemed to dance in the air between them. Lucas removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his trail-worn appearance. "Madam," he began, then cleared his throat. "Something smells mighty fine in here." Her lips curved into a smile that transformed her face entirely, bringing a sparkle to eyes the color of rich amber. "That would be today's sourdough. Just pulled the last batch from the oven about 10 minutes ago. I'd like a loaf if you have it to spare." "Of course." She moved to the shelf behind her and selected a round loaf. "Anything else? The cinnamon rolls are fresh too." "I'll take one of those as well." Lucas couldn't tear his gaze away from her hands, strong, capable hands that bore the marks of her craft, yet maintained a certain grace in their movements. As she wrapped his purchases in brown paper, he noticed the small, crescent-shaped burn on her wrist. The mark of someone who worked with hot ovens day in and day out. It wasn't a flaw to his eyes, but rather a badge of industry, of honest work. "That'll be 15 cents, she said, pushing the parcels across the counter. Lucas fumbled with his money pouch, extracting a silver dollar. "Keep the change, miss." "Cassidy, Penelope Cassidy." She raised an eyebrow at the generous tip. "And you are Lucas Granger, just passing through on my way north." She studied him for a moment, taking in his trail-worn clothes, the revolver holstered at his hip, the lean hardness of a man who spent most of his life outdoors. "Cattle drive," he nodded, surprised by her perception, "taking a herd to Fort Benton." Decided to come through the mountains instead of the eastern route this time. "Well, Mr. Granger, enjoy your bread. I hope it satisfies after trail rations." There was something in her tone, a hint of amusement, perhaps, or understanding that made him want to linger, to learn more about this woman who seemed so at home in her bakery yet knowledgeable about the wider world beyond. "Thank you, Miss Cassidy. I'm sure it will." He settled his hat back on his head, nodded politely, and reluctantly turned to leave. Outside, the afternoon had begun its slow slide toward evening, painting the mountains to the west in shades of purple and gold. Lucas stood on the sidewalk for a moment, then tore off a piece of the still warm bread and put it in his mouth. The flavor was beyond anything he'd tasted in months, rich, slightly tangy, with a perfect crust and a soft interior. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring it. When he opened them again, he was looking back at the bakery door. Before he could question himself, he was walking back inside. The bell jingled again, and Penelope looked up from where she was organizing something beneath the counter. "Did you forget something, Mr. Granger?" "How many loaves do you have left today?" he asked, the question surprising even himself. She blinked. "About a dozen, I'd say. Why do you ask? I'll take them all." Her eyes widened. "All of them. That's quite a lot of bread for one man." "I've got hungry men back at camp," he improvised, though in truth he was camped alone and the cattle drive he'd mentioned was still weeks away. Nothing raises spirits like fresh bread. She looked skeptical but began gathering the loaves anyway. "That will be $1.80. Lucas placed $2 on the counter. "And information, if you're willing to sell that too." Her hands stilled on the bread. "What kind of information?" "The kind that tells me what time you close up shop, and whether you might be inclined to share a proper meal with a traveler who's been too long on the trail." For a long moment, she said nothing, and Lucas feared he'd overstepped. Then she smiled, not the polite shopkeeper's smile from before, but something warmer, with a hint of challenge in it. "I close at 6, and I might be persuaded to dine at the hotel restaurant across the street at 7, provided the company is civil and the conversation interesting." Relief and anticipation mingled in Lucas's chest. "I clean up better than I look right now," he assured her. "I should hope so," she replied with a teasing glint in her eye. "Now, how exactly do you plan to carry a dozen loaves of bread?" 20 minutes later, Lucas emerged from the bathhouse behind the hotel, freshly shaved and dressed in the one decent shirt and pair of trousers he carried in his saddlebags. The bread, most of it, anyway, had been distributed among the children playing near the livery stable, earning him bemused looks from their mothers and grateful smiles from the little ones. He'd kept 2 loaves for himself and had arranged with the stable boy to have the rest delivered to the church the next morning. It had been an impulsive purchase, driven by something he couldn't quite name, a desire to impress, perhaps, or simply to have a reason to see her again. At precisely 7 o'clock, Lucas entered the hotel restaurant. It was a modest establishment but clean and well kept, with white tablecloths and a small vase of wildflowers on each table. Penelope was already seated by a window, looking out at the street. She'd changed from her work clothes into a simple blue dress, her hair now arranged in a more elaborate style that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. She turned as he approached, and for a second he thought he saw a flicker of approval in her eyes before her expression settled into one of pleasant neutrality. "Mr. Granger, right on time. Miss Cassidy." He took the seat across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to dine with me." "I was curious," she admitted. "It isn't every day a man buys out my entire inventory of bread." The waiter approached, and they ordered roast beef for him, chicken for her, and glasses of the local beer. "So," she continued once they were alone again, "did your men enjoy their feast of bread?" Lucas felt a flush creep up his neck. "I should confess something. There are no men waiting at camp." Her eyebrows rose. No, I'm traveling alone for now, meeting the outfit in Helena next month." He twirled the beer glass between his fingers. "The truth is, I wanted an excuse to come back and speak with you again." Penelope's expression softened. "That's quite a lot of bread to buy for an excuse. It didn't go to waste. The children by the livery seemed happy enough with it, and the rest is going to the church." "That was kind of you." She took a sip of her beer, though rather extravagant. "I've learned that life on the trail teaches a man not to waste opportunities when they present themselves." He looked directly into her eyes, "And meeting you felt like an opportunity I shouldn't squander." A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "You're very direct, Mr. Granger." "Lucas, please. And yes, I suppose I am. The trail doesn't leave much room for dancing around matters." Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Lucas waited until she had taken her first bite before continuing. So, how does a woman like you come to be running a bakery in a place like Silverwater Creek? It's not exactly a metropolis. A woman like me? There was a hint of challenge in her voice, educated, confident, clearly capable of more than most frontier towns might offer. She seemed to consider whether to be offended, then relented. I came west with my brother after our parents died. He had notions of striking it rich in the silver mines, and she hesitated. I had notions of leaving behind a life that had become unbearably predictable. And your brother, Patrick, is still chasing silver, last I heard. He moves from claim to claim, always convinced the next one will be the mother lode. She smiled fondly. We write letters. He sends me money when he can, though I've told him I don't need it. The bakery does well enough. How did you learn to bake like that? That sourdough was the best thing I've tasted in years, pride shone in her eyes. My grandmother taught me. She was from San Francisco originally, brought her sourdough starter with her when she moved east. I've kept it alive all these years. So you brought a piece of your past with you to the frontier. I suppose I did. She tilted her head, studying him. And you, Lucas Granger, what's your story? He cut a piece of his roast beef before answering. Not much to tell. Born in Missouri, left home at 16 to work cattle. Been doing it ever since, moving from outfit to outfit, drive to drive. No family, parents gone. One sister back east, married with children I've never met. He shrugged, trying to make light of it. The men you ride with become your family after a while. That sounds lonely. It can be, he admitted, but there's something to be said for the open country, for seeing places most folks only read about. I understand that, Penelope said softly. It's part of why I came west. I wanted to see something different, be someone different. And have you become someone different? She considered the question seriously. Yes and no. The circumstances of my life have changed dramatically, but at heart, I'm still the same person. Perhaps just a braver version. It takes courage to build a life out here, as does driving cattle across hundreds of miles of wild country. They fell into an easy conversation then, sharing stories of their respective journeys west. Lucas told her about the dangers and beauty of the trail, crossing flooded rivers, navigating mountain passes, the spectacular sunsets over vast prairies. Penelope described her early days in Silverwater Creek, how she'd started by baking in the kitchen of the boarding house where she lived, selling her bread to miners and townspeople until she'd saved enough to open her own shop. It wasn't easy, she confessed. A woman in business still raises eyebrows, even out here where people pride themselves on being progressive. Yet you persevered. What choice did I have? Return east as a failure, marry some miner who'd expect me to abandon my ambitions? She shook her head. No, I decided if I was going to make a life here, it would be on my terms. Lucas found himself increasingly drawn to her determination, to the intelligence that shone in her eyes when she spoke of her business, the way she'd navigated the challenges of frontier life with ingenuity and grace. As they finished their meal and lingered over coffee, the restaurant gradually emptied around them. The waiter cleared their plates with barely disguised impatience. I believe we're keeping them from closing, Penelope noted with amusement. Lucas glanced at his pocket watch, surprised to find it was nearly 10 o'clock. I've monopolized your entire evening. I didn't notice the time passing, she said, and there was a warmth in her voice that made his heart beat a little faster. He paid the bill despite her protests, and they stepped out into the cool night air. The main street was quiet now, most of the businesses closed, only the saloon at the far end still spilling light and noise into the darkness. May I walk you home? Lucas asked. She nodded, and they set off side by side, their steps falling naturally into rhythm. How long will you be in Silverwater Creek? Penelope asked after a moment. I plan to leave tomorrow, but he hesitated. I'm thinking I might stay a few days, rest my horse before the mountain passes. That seems sensible. They stopped in front of a small house set back from the main street, a neat picket fence surrounding a tiny garden where herbs and flowers grew together in organized chaos. This is me, she said, turning to face him. In the moonlight, with the scent of night blooming flowers around them, Lucas was struck again by how remarkable she was, this woman who had carved out her own place in the harsh frontier. who spoke her mind and baked bread that tasted like home. "Thank you for dining with me tonight, Penelope," he said softly. "It's been the most pleasant evening I've had in longer than I can remember." "I enjoyed it too." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the stars above. Perhaps before you leave town, you might stop by the bakery again. I make cinnamon rolls on Thursdays." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," he promised. There was a moment brief but electric when he thought about kissing her. The way she looked at him, the slight parting of her lips, suggested she might welcome it. But it was too soon, and Lucas had learned that some things were worth waiting for. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Miss Cassidy." "Good night, Mr. Granger," she replied, her voice a touch breathier than before. He waited until she was safely inside, the lamp lit in her front window, before turning to walk back to the hotel. His step was lighter than it had been in years, and for the first time in a very long time, Lucas Granger found himself looking forward to tomorrow with genuine anticipation. The morning dawned clear and bright, the summer sun already warming the air as Lucas made his way to the livery stable to check on Thunder. The big gray horse nickered a greeting, looking rested and content after a night of proper care. "Looking mighty fine this morning," the stable boy commented, eyeing Lucas's freshly pressed shirt and polished boots. "Got business in town today, mister? You could say that," Lucas replied with a smile, slipping the boy an extra coin. "Take good care of my horse." "I'll be staying a few more days." He strolled down the boardwalk, tipping his hat to the ladies he passed, nodding to the men. Silverwater Creek was coming to life around him, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, a wagon loaded with timber creaking past, children darting between buildings on their way to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. The bell above the bakery door jingled as he entered, and the now familiar scent of fresh bread enveloped him. Penelope looked up from where she was arranging pastries in the display case, and the smile that lit her face made his heart skip. "Good morning, Lucas." "I didn't expect to see you quite so early. Couldn't stay away," he admitted. "Something about the aroma of your bakery seems to pull a man in like a lasso," she laughed, the sound brightening the already sunlit shop. "Are you comparing my bread to cattle roping?" "More like comparing myself to the cattle," he replied with a grin. Helpless to resist, a young woman emerged from the back room, carrying a tray of small rolls. She raised an eyebrow at the exchange, looking between Lucas and Penelope with undisguised curiosity. "Oh. Lucas, this is Sarah Miller, my assistant. Sarah, this is Mr. Lucas Granger, the bread buyer," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "Miss Cassidy told me about your purchase yesterday." Half the town's talking about the generous stranger who bought out the bakery and gave the bread to children and the church. Lucas felt heat rise to his face. "I didn't realize it would cause such a stir. Small towns," Penelope said with a shrug. "News travels faster than a prairie fire." "Sarah, would you mind watching the counter for a few minutes?" Penelope asked, untying her apron. "I need to show Mr. Granger something in the back." The younger woman's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "Of course, Miss Cassidy." Penelope motioned for Lucas to follow her through the doorway that led to the bakery's kitchen. It was a warm, inviting space, dominated by a large brick oven built into the wall. Wooden counters lined with bowls and baking implements stretched along one side, while a window on the other let in the morning light. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said once they were alone. "Reverend Thompson came by earlier to express his gratitude for the bread donation. Apparently, they're hosting a group of travelers passing through a family that lost everything in a fire back east. I'm glad it could be put to good use," Lucas said, genuinely touched. It was a kind thing to do, especially as an impromptu decision. She moved to one of the counters where a cloth-covered mound sat. "I made something special this morning as a thank you." She pulled back the cloth to reveal a beautiful braided loaf, golden brown and still warm from the oven. "It's a recipe my grandmother taught me, challah bread. We only made it for special occasions." Lucas was momentarily speechless, moved by the gesture. "Penelope, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, just enjoy it." She wrapped the loaf carefully in paper. "And perhaps tell me if you'd like to see more of the town today." I close early on Wednesdays, only half day. He met her gaze, finding hope and invitation there. Nothing would please me more. Their fingertips brushed as she handed him the bread, and this time the contact lingered, neither of them pulling away immediately. The kitchen suddenly seemed warmer, the air between them charged with possibility. The bell from the front shop jingled, breaking the moment. "I should get back," Penelope said softly. "What time shall I return for our tour of Silverwater Creek?" Lucas asked. 1 o'clock. "We can have a picnic by the creek if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." As he left the bakery with his special loaf tucked carefully under his arm, Lucas felt a lightness in his step that had been absent for years. The town that had seemed just another stop on his journey now held promise and intrigue, all centered around a remarkable woman with flour-dusted hands and amber eyes that saw right through him. At precisely 1 o'clock, Lucas returned to the bakery to find Penelope locking the front door, a basket hanging from her arm. She had changed from her work clothes into a simpler dress of pale green, her hair loosely braided and draped over one shoulder. "You look lovely," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. It's nice to wear something that isn't covered in flour occasionally. Although flour becomes you as well," he teased, offering his arm. "Shall we?" She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, and together they strolled through town, Penelope pointing out landmarks and sharing snippets of local history. "That's Mr. Henderson's newspaper office," she said, indicating a narrow building with large front windows. "He prints the Silverwater Sentinel every Friday, though there's rarely enough news to fill more than 2 pages. What does he print instead? Poetry, mostly. He fancies himself quite the wordsmith. And advertisements, of course, lots of advertisements." They passed the general store, the blacksmith shop, the small doctor's office. At each place, townspeople greeted Penelope warmly, casting curious glances at Lucas. "Word has definitely spread about you," she murmured as they moved away from a particularly inquisitive group of ladies outside the dressmaker's shop. "I believe you've become something of a local mystery." "Me, I'm about as mysterious as a bowl of beans," Lucas protested. "Oh, I don't know." The handsome cowboy who rides into town, buys out a bakery, donates to the church, and then delays his journey northward. She cast him a sidelong glance. "People are bound to speculate. And what are they speculating? Some think you're a wealthy rancher scouting the area for land. Others suggest you might be running from something or someone back east." Her lips quirked in amusement. "Mrs. Daniels from the dressmaker's shop is convinced you're actually a government agent investigating silver claim fraud." Lucas laughed, the sound echoing down the street. "I hate to disappoint Mrs. Daniels, but I'm just a cowhand with a sweet tooth and an appreciation for good company." They left the main street behind, following a narrow path that wound down toward the creek that gave the town its name. The water burbled over rocks, creating a pleasant backdrop of sound as they found a grassy spot beneath a cottonwood tree. Penelope spread a blanket from her basket, then began unpacking their picnic-fresh bread, of course. Cheese, sliced ham, apples, and 2 bottles of sarsaparilla. "This is quite a feast," Lucas commented, helping her arrange the food. "It's not every day I play tour guide," she replied. "I wanted to make it special." They ate companionably, the conversation flowing as easily as it had the night before. Lucas told her more about his life on the trail, the camaraderie of the cowboys, the challenges of managing thousands of cattle across difficult terrain, the peace he found in the wide open spaces. "But don't you ever get tired of moving?" Penelope asked, lying back on the blanket to look up at the leaves dancing in the breeze above them. "Don't you ever want to stay in one place, put down roots?" Lucas stretched out beside her, propping himself up on one elbow so he could see her face. "I used to think the very idea would suffocate me. The open trail was freedom, and freedom was everything. And now. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Now I wonder if maybe I've been looking at freedom all wrong. Maybe it's not about the absence of ties, but about choosing the right ones." Her eyes met his, searching. "That's quite a change in perspective. Sometimes a man needs to see something different to realize what he's been missing." The double meaning hung in the air between them, unacknowledged but unmistakable. Penelope sat up, breaking the moment, and reached for an apple. Tell me about the cattle drive you're joining. Where are the cattle coming from? Where are they headed? Lucas accepted the change in subject, explaining how the herd was coming up from Wyoming, destined for the hungry miners and settlers in the Montana goldfields. It's good money, he said. The mining towns pay top dollar for beef. They're flush with gold but short on food. Is that why you do it? For the money, he considered the question. Partly, it's honest work that pays well enough, but there's more to it. He gazed out at the creek, watching the play of sunlight on water. There's something about moving across the land with purpose, about the rhythm of the days and nights, the challenges that test a man's mettle. It sounds meaningful, Penelope said. That's important, isn't it? To find meaning in what you do? It is. He looked back at her. Is that what you've found in your bakery? Meaning, she nodded slowly. There's satisfaction in creating something with your hands that nourishes others, in knowing that what you make brings comfort and pleasure. A soft smile played at her lips. And yes, there's meaning in that. They fell silent, each contemplating the paths that had led them to this moment, side by side on a blanket by a creek in a frontier town neither had planned to call significant. What was it like? Lucas asked eventually. Coming west as a woman alone, I wasn't entirely alone. I had Patrick, at least at first. She traced patterns on the blanket with her fingertip. But it was challenging. The journey itself was physically demanding: dust, heat, cold, rain, endless jolting in wagons with bad springs. And once you arrived, that was harder in different ways. The physical environment was harsh enough, but the social one. She sighed. A woman alone is viewed with suspicion or as prey. I learned quickly to be direct, to set boundaries, to make it clear I wasn't available for certain propositions. Anger flared in Lucas's chest at the thought of anyone treating her with disrespect. I'm sorry you had to face that. Don't be. It made me stronger. Her chin lifted slightly. And I've built something here that's mine, not my father's, not a husband's mine. There's power in that. There is, he agreed, admiration evident in his voice. You're quite remarkable, Penelope Cassidy. Her laughter was like water over stones, clear and musical. For baking bread and refusing to be intimidated, the bar for remarkable must be rather low in your estimation. On the contrary. He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I think it's set exactly right. The touch lingered, his fingers brushing against her cheek. She didn't pull away. Lucas, she said softly, his name a question and invitation all at once. He leaned forward, slowly enough to give her time to retreat if she wished. She didn't. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips touching his in a kiss so gentle it was barely there, a whisper, a promise, a beginning. When they parted, her eyes remained closed for a moment longer, as if she were memorizing the sensation. When she opened them, there was a new warmth there, mingled with something like wonder. I wasn't expecting you, she confessed. When I woke up yesterday, I had no idea my life was about to change. Is that what's happening? He asked, his voice husky. Our lives changing, isn't it? Her direct gaze challenged him to deny it. Yes, he admitted, I believe it is. The afternoon stretched on, golden and unhurried. They talked and laughed, sharing stories from their lives, discovering shared interests and friendly disagreements. They waded in the creek, splashing like children until they were both damp and breathless with laughter. They gathered wildflowers that Penelope wove into a simple crown, which she placed on Lucas's head with mock solemnity, declaring him king of Silverwater Creek, lord of the loaves. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the grass, they reluctantly packed up their picnic. I should get you back, Lucas said. People will talk. People already talk, Penelope replied with a shrug, but you're right. I have bread to start for tomorrow. They walked back to town hand in hand, no longer bothering with the pretense of formality. The curious glances from townspeople seemed to slide off them, inconsequential in the face of the connection they'd found. At Penelope's door, Lucas hesitated. When can I see you again? I work early hours, she reminded him, but I'm free tomorrow evening. Dinner at the hotel again, she shook her head. Let me cook for you this time. Here, she gestured to her small house. 7 o'clock. The invitation to her home, to her private space, felt significant. I'd be honored. This time, when he leaned down to kiss her goodbye, there was no hesitation on either side. The kiss was deeper, more certain, a seal on the day they'd shared and the evening to come. "Until tomorrow," he murmured against her lips. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, her eyes bright with anticipation. As Lucas walked back to the hotel, he found himself whistling a tune he hadn't thought of in years, a simple melody his mother used to hum while baking. The coincidence made him smile. He'd ridden into Silverwater Creek, seeking only a meal and a brief rest before continuing his journey. Instead, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation for Lucas. He spent the morning helping the blacksmith repair a wagon wheel, grateful for the physical labor that kept his hands busy and his mind from dwelling too much on the evening ahead. In the afternoon, he rode Thunder out of town for a few miles, letting the horse stretch his legs while Lucas contemplated the unexpected turn his life had taken. By the time he returned to the hotel to clean up and change for dinner, he had come to a decision. It was early yet, perhaps foolishly early, but he'd spent too many years drifting not to recognize when something valuable had crossed his path. At 7 o'clock precisely, he knocked on Penelope's door, a small bunch of wildflowers in his hand. She opened it immediately, as if she'd been waiting just on the other side. "Lucas," she greeted him, her smile warm and genuine. "Come in." The interior of her home was as neat and charming as its owner. The front room served as both parlor and dining area, with a small round table set for two by the window. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books, more books than Lucas had seen outside a proper city library. A comfortable-looking armchair sat in the corner beside an oil lamp, clearly her reading spot. Everything spoke of care and attention to detail, from the crocheted doilies on the side tables to the landscape paintings on the walls. "Your home is lovely," he said, offering her the wildflowers. "Thank you." She buried her nose in the blooms. "These are beautiful. Let me put them in water." She disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with the flowers arranged in a simple glass jar, which she placed in the center of the dinner table. "Something smells wonderful," Lucas commented, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. "Rabbit stew," she said, "with carrots and potatoes from my garden and herbs I gathered myself. You're a woman of many talents." "Living alone on the frontier requires it," she replied pragmatically, though her cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. Dinner was delicious, the stew rich and flavorful, accompanied by, of course, fresh bread. They ate by lamplight, the golden glow softening the edges of the room and creating an intimate bubble around them. "I rode out today," Lucas said as they finished their meal. "Took Thunder up into the foothills a ways. Did you enjoy the scenery? The views from up there can be spectacular." "I did, but I was thinking more than looking, to be honest." She tilted her head, studying him. "Serious thoughts. Very." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Penelope, I know we've known each other only a short time, but I've never been one to hesitate when I recognize something valuable." Her fingers tightened around his. "What are you saying, Lucas?" "I'm saying that I came to Silverwater Creek expecting nothing more than a hot meal and a brief rest. Instead, I found you." He took a deep breath. "I'm supposed to join that cattle drive in Helena next month, but I'm considering not going." Her eyes widened. "Not going." "But you said it was good money, and you've clearly already made arrangements. Some things are worth more than money or arrangements." He held her gaze steadily. "I could stay here in Silverwater Creek, find work locally. There must be ranches in the area that need experienced hands." "Lucas." She began, her expression a mixture of hope and caution. "Are you sure? This is very sudden." "I've spent 16 years on the move, Penelope. That's more than enough time to know when something feels right." He squeezed her hand gently. "And being with you feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I feel it too," she whispered, "but I don't want you to make a decision you'll regret. What if you stay and then grow restless? What if you come to resent giving up the trail? What if I go and spend every day regretting leaving you behind?" he countered. "Life doesn't come with guarantees, Penelope. All we can do is make the best choice with what we know right now." She was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. There is the Hartwell Ranch about 10 miles south of town, she said finally. I've heard they're looking for experienced cowboys to help expand their operation. Hope surged in Lucas's chest. Is that a yes? You want me to stay? It's I want you to try, she clarified. Stay through the summer. See if Silverwater Creek can be home for you. See if we can be something to each other worth building on. It was a sensible proposal, more measured than his impulsive suggestion, and he admired her practical approach even as he felt certain he wouldn't need months to know his own mind. Through the summer, then, he agreed, raising her hand to his lips. Though I suspect I'll have my answer much sooner. After dinner, they moved to the small sofa near the unlit fireplace. Lucas slipped his arm around Penelope's shoulders and she leaned into him with a contented sigh. Tell me more about your books, he said, nodding toward the shelves. That's quite a collection for a frontier bakery owner. Books have always been my refuge, she explained. When my parents died and our home was sold to pay debts, the books were the one thing I insisted on keeping. They've traveled with me across the country, a piece of home I could carry. What do you like to read? Everything. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. History, poetry, novels, scientific journals. Knowledge is its own kind of freedom, don't you think? I've never thought of it that way, but yes, I suppose it is. He glanced at her curiously. Can you recommend something for me? It's been a while since I've read anything beyond trail maps and cattle contracts. She rose and went to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines until she found what she was looking for. Try this, she said, handing him a well-worn volume. It's about the West, but not the West we live in, rather, the one we imagine. Lucas examined the book, The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. I'll start it tonight, he promised. They talked late into the evening, the conversation flowing easily between them, punctuated by increasingly lingering kisses. When the clock on her mantel struck 11, Lucas reluctantly rose to leave. I should go, he said, though every part of him wanted to stay. You have an early morning at the bakery. She walked him to the door, her hand still in his. Will you come by tomorrow? I'm making those cinnamon rolls I mentioned. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, he assured her, drawing her close for one last kiss. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness for Lucas and Penelope. True to his word, Lucas rode out to the Hartwell Ranch and secured a position helping to train their horses and manage their small but growing herd of cattle. The work was steady and satisfying, allowing him to be in town most evenings and all-day Sundays. He fell into a rhythm mornings at the ranch, afternoons sometimes spent helping around town, evenings with Penelope. They dined together, read together, walked together along the creek where they'd had their first picnic. On Sundays, they attended church services, drawing knowing looks from the congregation but caring little for the gossip their courtship inspired. July turned to August, and the summer days began to shorten almost imperceptibly. The cattle drive Lucas had abandoned would be well underway now, pushing north toward Fort Benton. Sometimes, when he lay in his hotel room at night, he'd kept his room there, propriety being what it was, he thought about the trail and the men he would have ridden with. But the pull was nostalgic rather than urgent, a fond remembrance of a life that no longer called to him with the same intensity. On a warm Sunday afternoon in mid-August, Lucas and Penelope rode double on Thunder to a secluded spot in the foothills that had become a favorite retreat. A natural clearing surrounded by pines offered views of the valley below, with Silverwater Creek looking like a toy town from this height. They spread their blanket beneath a towering pine and unpacked their usual picnic fare. Penelope had outdone herself this time, including small hand pies filled with late summer berries alongside the bread and cheese they always brought. You spoil me, Lucas said, biting into one of the pies and closing his eyes in appreciation. I like feeding you, she replied simply. It makes me happy to see you enjoy what I make. I enjoy everything about you, he said, setting aside the half-eaten pie to take her hands in his. Penelope, do you remember the agreement we made when I decided to stay in Silverwater Creek? She nodded, a hint of wariness crossing her features. Through the summer, to see if this could be home for you. Summer's almost over, he pointed out. The nights are getting cooler, the days shorter. And her voice was carefully neutral, but he could see the anxiety in her eyes. "And I've made my decision." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Actually, I made it weeks ago, but I wanted to honor our agreement." Penelope's eyes widened as he opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring with a small pearl into his palm. "I rode to Helena last week," he explained. "Had some business at the bank there, moving my savings to the Silverwater Creek branch, and while I was there I found this. Lucas." She whispered, her hands trembling slightly in his. "Penelope Cassidy, I came to your bakery looking for bread and found the home I never knew I was searching for." He held up the ring. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to make a life with me here in Silverwater Creek. I can't offer you grand adventures or exotic travels, but I can promise to love you, support your dreams, and be by your side through whatever life brings us." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Lucas Granger, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally broke apart, Penelope looked down at the pearl gleaming on her finger. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "How did you know I prefer pearls to diamonds? You mentioned it once when we passed the jewelry display in the general store. You said diamonds were cold, but pearls had warmth and character." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I listen when you talk," she laughed through her tears. "That might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their future together, agreeing to a small wedding in October, discussing how Lucas would move into Penelope's house, debating whether to expand the bakery or open a second business. "I've been thinking about a café," Penelope said, excitement coloring her voice. "Something connected to the bakery but offering proper meals too. Silverwater Creek is growing. We could serve the stagecoach passengers, the miners coming in from the hills, the ranchers on market days." "I think it's a wonderful idea," Lucas said, loving the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her business dreams. "We could call it Cassidy and Granger's, or maybe just Penelope's Place." "What about the Loaf and Ladle?" she suggested. "Simple but descriptive." "Perfect," he agreed. "Just like you." The sun was beginning to dip toward the mountains when they reluctantly packed up their picnic and mounted Thunder for the ride back to town. Penelope sat in front of Lucas, her back against his chest, his arms around her waist as he held the reins. "I never expected this," she said as they descended towards Silverwater Creek. "When Patrick and I came west, I thought I was leaving behind any chance at a conventional life. I convinced myself I didn't want that anyway, that independence was enough. And now," Lucas murmured against her hair, "now I understand that loving someone doesn't have to mean losing yourself. It can mean becoming more fully who you are with someone who sees and values all of you." She turned her head to look up at him. "That's what you give me, Lucas, the freedom to be exactly who I am and to be loved for it." His throat tight with emotion, Lucas could only nod and hold her closer as they continued their journey home. The news of their engagement spread through Silverwater Creek like wildfire. By Monday afternoon, it seemed every resident of the town had found a reason to stop by the bakery to offer congratulations and, of course, to inspect the ring on Penelope's finger. "You'd think they'd never seen an engagement before," Penelope commented wryly as she closed up shop that evening. "It's not every day the town's most eligible businesswoman agrees to marry a drifter cowboy," Lucas replied with a grin, helping her sweep the floor. "Former drifter," she corrected, setting aside the broom to wrap her arms around his waist. "Current respected employee of the Hartwell Ranch and future co-proprietor of the Loaf and Ladle." "When you put it that way, I sound downright respectable. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone about your wild past." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. "Your reputation as a solid citizen is safe with me." September brought cooler temperatures and preparations for their October wedding. Lucas continued his work at the Hartwell Ranch, impressing the owner with his knowledge of horses and cattle management. Penelope began making plans to expand the bakery into the vacant shop next door, sketching designs for the café they would open together after the wedding. On a crisp Saturday morning, Lucas arrived at the bakery to find Penelope in a state of unusual agitation. "What's wrong?" He asked, immediately concerned. She handed him a telegram. "It's from Patrick. He's coming for the wedding." Lucas scanned the brief message. "Received your letter. Stop. Congratulations. Stop arriving Silverwater Creek October 10th. Stop looking forward to meeting the man who bought your bread, and your heart. Stop. Patrick." "That's wonderful news, isn't it?" Lucas asked, noting her furrowed brow. "You haven't seen your brother in what, 2 years?" "Almost 3, she corrected. "And yes, it's wonderful, but—" She sighed. "Patrick can be protective and judgmental, and he has a knack for finding trouble. You're worried he won't approve of me?" "No, maybe, I don't know." She ran a hand through her hair, disturbing the neat arrangement. "It's more that Patrick has opinions about everything, and he doesn't hesitate to share them. He might try to direct things." Lucas took her hands in his. "Penelope, I'm not concerned about your brother's opinions. If he's anything like you, I expect we'll get along just fine, and if not—" He shrugged. "It won't change how I feel about you or our plans together." She relaxed slightly. "You're right, I'm being silly. It's just that Patrick is my only family and I want him to be happy for us." "He will be," Lucas assured her. "How could he not be when he sees how happy you are?" The wedding plans continued apace. Penelope chose a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk from the dressmaker's shop. Lucas ordered a new suit from Helena, splurging on fine wool and proper boots to match. They decided on a ceremony at the small church, followed by a reception at the hotel, which had offered its dining room for the occasion. As September waned, Lucas moved his few possessions from the hotel to Penelope's house, though he maintained his gentlemanly separate sleeping arrangements by taking the small room that had once been Patrick's when he stayed with his sister. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows among the more conservative townspeople, but most understood the practicality of the situation, especially with their wedding less than 2 weeks away. On the first day of October, disaster struck. Lucas was at the Hartwell Ranch, helping to break a particularly stubborn Mustang when the animal reared unexpectedly. Lucas lost his balance and fell hard, his left leg twisting beneath him as he hit the ground. The sickening crack was audible even over the horse's frantic neighing. He was brought back to town in the Hartwell wagon, his leg splinted and his face white with pain. Dr. Wilson met them at his office, where he confirmed what Lucas already knew: his leg was broken, a clean break of the tibia that would heal well but would keep him immobile for weeks. "I'm sorry, son," the doctor said as he finished setting and properly casting the leg. "You won't be standing at that altar on the 15th. We'll need to postpone the wedding." "No," Lucas said firmly, despite the pain clouding his vision. "We're not postponing anything. I'll marry Penelope on the 15th if I have to hop down the aisle on 1 foot." "That won't be necessary," Penelope said from the doorway, where she'd been hovering anxiously since the wagon had arrived. "We'll simply adjust our plans," and adjust they did. The ceremony was moved from the church to Penelope's parlor, with the reception to follow in the same space. The guest list was trimmed to include only their closest friends and, of course, Patrick, who was due to arrive in just over a week. Lucas chafed at his enforced idleness, unused to being confined indoors and dependent on others. Penelope bore his occasional frustration with grace, distracting him with books, chess games, and discussions about their future café. "I've been thinking about the menu," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, Lucas's injured leg propped on a footstool. "Simple but hearty fare: stews, roasts, fresh vegetables when we can get them, and bread, of course, always bread." "It sounds perfect," Lucas said, his irritation at his condition momentarily forgotten as he watched her animated face in the firelight. "You know, in a way, this accident might be a blessing in disguise." She looked at him skeptically. "How do you figure that?" "It's given us this time together, planning and dreaming. If I were still working at the ranch, we'd only have evenings." He reached for her hand. "And it's shown me even more clearly what a remarkable woman I'm marrying. Your strength, your adaptability. You haven't complained once about the changes to our wedding or having to care for an injured fiancé." "Why would I complain?" she asked simply. "We're still getting married and you're still healing. That's what matters." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Yes," she smiled, "but I don't mind hearing it again. On October 10th, right on schedule, Patrick Cassidy arrived in Silverwater Creek. Penelope went to meet the stagecoach while Lucas waited at the house, his legs still firmly encased in plaster, but his spirits high at the prospect of finally meeting his future brother-in-law. The door burst open an hour later, admitting a whirlwind of energy in the form of a tall man with Penelope's chestnut hair and direct gaze. Behind him, Penelope carried a small valise, her expression a mixture of exasperation and affection. "So you're the cowboy who bought my sister's bread and her heart," Patrick declared, striding across the room to shake Lucas's hand. "I've heard quite a story about you." "All good, I hope," Lucas replied, returning the firm handshake. "Mostly," Patrick grinned. "Though I understand you originally planned to be just passing through. What changed your mind, besides my sister's excellent baking?" "Patrick," Penelope admonished, setting down the valise. "At least let the man have a cup of coffee before you interrogate him." "It's all right," Lucas assured her. "Your brother has every right to be curious." He met Patrick's assessing gaze directly. "To answer your question, I stayed because I recognized something rare and precious when I found it. Your sister is the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I'm fortunate beyond words that she's agreed to marry me." Patrick's expression softened. "Well said." He glanced at Penelope, who was busying herself with the coffee pot. "She is remarkable, isn't she? Always was, even as a little girl. Stubborn as a mule, smart as a whip, and kind to her core." "I can hear you, you know," Penelope called from the kitchen. Patrick lowered his voice conspiratorially. "And she has ears like a bat." Despite Penelope's concerns, Patrick proved to be an enthusiastic supporter of their marriage. He helped with the last-minute wedding preparations, moving furniture to create space for the ceremony and hanging bunting and flowers to decorate the modest parlor. "I like him," he told Penelope on the eve of the wedding as they sat on her porch while Lucas napped inside. "He looks at you the way a man should look at the woman he loves, like you're the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one." "I'm glad you approve," she said, genuine relief in her voice. "Your opinion matters to me, you know." "I know." He squeezed her hand. "But even if I didn't approve, it wouldn't change anything, would it? You've always made your own decisions." "True," she admitted, "but it's easier when the people you love support those decisions." "Well, you have my full support. Lucas is a good man. I can see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice when he talks about you and your future together." He grinned suddenly. "And anyone who would buy out an entire bakery just to have an excuse to see you again has the kind of romantic streak I can appreciate." On the morning of October 15th, Penelope's small house bustled with activity. The parlor had been transformed into a wedding venue, with chairs borrowed from the church arranged in rows facing the fireplace, which was decorated with autumn leaves and late-blooming wildflowers. In the bedroom, Penelope stood before the mirror in her ivory silk dress, her hair arranged in an elegant knot adorned with small pearl combs that had belonged to her mother. "You look beautiful, Penny," Patrick said from the doorway, using the childhood nickname only he was allowed to use. Like Mother on her wedding day, tears threatened to spill from Penelope's eyes. "Do you think they would have liked Lucas?" "They would have loved him," Patrick assured her. "Especially Father. He always said you needed a man who could match your spirit, not try to tame it." A knock at the front door signaled the arrival of the first guests. Patrick offered his arm to his sister. Ready to become Mrs. Granger, she took a deep breath, then nodded, a radiant smile blooming on her face. More than ready. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. Lucas stood with the aid of crutches, his injured leg seeming not to pain him at all as he watched Penelope walk toward him on her brother's arm. Reverend Thompson kept his remarks brief, focusing on the themes of love, partnership, and building a life together. When it came time for the vows, Lucas handed his crutches to Patrick and balanced on his good leg, taking both of Penelope's hands in his. "Penelope," he began, his voice steady and clear, "when I rode into Silverwater Creek, I was a man without roots, without direction beyond the next trail, the next job. You changed that. You showed me that home isn't a place, it's a person, a feeling, a sense of belonging." He squeezed her hands gently. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, to love you through whatever challenges life brings us, and to never take for granted the gift of your heart, which is far more precious to me than all the bread in your bakery." Laughter rippled through the small gathering at this last statement, and Penelope's eyes shone with tears and joy. "Lucas," she responded, her voice wavering slightly, "you came into my life unexpectedly, like a summer storm that changes the landscape. Before you, I had convinced myself that independence meant being alone, that I could find fulfillment in my work and my small place in this town." She took a steadying breath. "You showed me that the heart has infinite capacity, that loving you doesn't diminish me but makes me more fully myself. I promise to walk beside you through all of life's journeys, to be your safe harbor as you have been mine, and to bake you fresh bread every day for the rest of our lives." There wasn't a dry eye in the house as they exchanged rings, a simple gold band joining the pearl engagement ring on Penelope's finger, and a matching band for Lucas. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Thompson concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Granger." Lucas didn't need to be told twice. Balancing carefully on his good leg, he pulled Penelope into his arms and kissed her with all the love and promise of their shared future. The reception that followed was joyous and intimate. The townspeople who had come to care for both Penelope and Lucas celebrated with them, sharing food, drink, and stories late into the evening. When the last guest had departed and Patrick had retired to his room at the hotel, insisting that the newlyweds should have the house to themselves, despite Lucas's protests that his injured leg would prevent any impropriety, Lucas and Penelope found themselves alone at last. "Mrs. Granger," Lucas said, drawing her close as they stood by the fire. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him, resting her head against his chest. "And you, any regrets about missing that cattle drive?" "Not a single one," he said firmly. "Though I do have one regret about today." She looked up, alarmed. "What's that?" "That this confounded leg means I can't sweep you off your feet and carry you to our bedroom as I've imagined doing." Penelope laughed, the sound warming him more than the fire. "There will be plenty of time for that when you're healed. For now," she stepped back and offered her hand, "I'm perfectly capable of walking to our bedroom beside my husband." "Have I told you today how much I love you?" Lucas asked, taking her hand. "Yes," she smiled. "But I don't mind hearing it again." 5 years later, on a bright spring morning, Lucas stood at the counter of the Loaf and Ladle, serving coffee to the passengers of the morning stagecoach. The café had become a fixture in Silverwater Creek, known throughout the territory for its excellent food and warm hospitality. The bakery portion of the business continued to thrive under Penelope's expert hand, while Lucas had taken primary responsibility for the café side, proving to have a talent for cooking hearty meals that satisfied the appetites of miners, cowboys, and travelers alike. Their personal life had flourished as well. 3-year-old Elizabeth played in a corner of the café, her dark curls bouncing as she arranged wooden blocks into increasingly complex structures. She had her mother's amber eyes and her father's determined chin, and was the light of their lives. The bell above the door jingled, and Penelope entered from the bakery next door, a fresh tray of cinnamon rolls in her hands. Despite being 6 months pregnant with their second child, she moved with the same grace and energy that had first caught Lucas's attention all those years ago. "Perfect timing," he said, taking the tray from her. "The stagecoach passengers were just asking if we had anything sweet to go with their coffee." "When don't we?" she replied with a smile, leaning up to kiss his cheek. "How's our little architect this morning?" They both looked over at Elizabeth, who had constructed a tower nearly as tall as herself and was now circling it critically, making adjustments here and there. "Focused, as usual," Lucas chuckled. "She hasn't said a word in 20 minutes, just building and rebuilding." "Like someone else I know when he's working on a new recipe," Penelope teased, patting his arm affectionately. As the stagecoach passengers finished their refreshments and departed, a comfortable lull fell over the café. Lucas wiped down the counter while Penelope sat at a table near Elizabeth, resting her feet and watching their daughter play. "Do you ever think about it?" Penelope asked suddenly. "That first day when you bought all my bread," Lucas smiled, remembering. "Often, best investment I ever made." You were quite the mysterious stranger, she reminisced. The handsome cowboy who rode into town and bought every loaf I had, and then had the audacity to say I'd buy your heart too, he added, coming to sit beside her. Pretty presumptuous of me. Yes, she agreed, leaning against his shoulder. Terribly forward, almost scandalous. Yet here we are, she echoed softly, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded belly where their second child kicked vigorously against his palm. Lucas looked around at the thriving business they'd built together, at their beautiful daughter, at his wife's glowing face, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the twist of fate that had led him to a small bakery in Silverwater Creek on a dusty summer day 5 years ago. I came looking for bread, he murmured, pressing a kiss to Penelope's temple, and found everything I never knew I needed. She turned her face up to his, her eyes as bright and captivating as the first day he'd seen her. And I found a customer who wanted more than just what I was selling. Much more, he agreed, kissing her softly. In the corner, Elizabeth abandoned her tower of blocks and came running to her parents, clambering onto Lucas's lap with the easy confidence of a child who knows she is deeply loved. Story, Papa, she demanded, settling against his chest. Which one would you like, sweetheart? He asked, though he already knew the answer. The cowboy and the bread lady, she said predictably. It was her favorite tale, one she requested almost daily. Lucas caught Penelope's eye over their daughter's head, sharing a smile that held 5 years of love and memories. Once upon a time, he began, his voice dropping to the storytelling tone that Elizabeth loved, a very hungry cowboy rode into a town called Silverwater Creek. He was tired and dusty from the trail, and all he wanted was something good to eat. As Lucas recounted their story simplified for their daughter's ears, but true in all the ways that mattered, Penelope watched the man who had changed her life with a heart full of love. The cowboy who had bought her bread and, true to his word, had won her heart as well. The man who had given her a partnership more equal and fulfilling than she had ever dared to hope for, who had helped her expand her dreams beyond what she'd thought possible. Outside, Silverwater Creek continued to grow and thrive around them, but within the walls of the Loaf and Ladle, time seemed to stand still, a perfect moment of family, love, and the simple joy of being exactly where they were meant to be.